Most people think power is about volume, that the louder you scream, the more dominance you hold. But in the real world, especially in geopolitics, power whispers. It doesn't show up in viral news conferences or bombastic speeches. It appears in quiet, decisive moments that rewrite entire regional dynamics without firing a single shot publicly. And that is exactly what India has mastered in dealing with Pakistan. A new kind of response. Cold, calculated, precise. A slap not with noise but with silence, sharp enough to cut through steel. When Pakistan staged provocations, from proxy terrorism to cross-border violations, the old India would protest. It would gather files, appeal to the international community, and wait for statements from Washington or Geneva. But something changed. A psychological shift, a philosophical pivot. India realized that respect isn't given, it's enforced. It understood that when dealing with a neighbor like Pakistan, talking is noise. Action is the only language that gets translated. Take the Balakot airstrike. This wasn't just a retaliation, it was a paradigm shift, a new precedent. India crossed the lock and hit deep into Pakistani territory, not through a war, but through targeted, controlled retaliation. That changed the rules. And the most brilliant part? India didn't linger. It didn't gloat. It didn't turn it into a media circus. It struck, made its point, and returned to business as usual. That silence after the strike, that's where the slap echoed the loudest. You see, the psychological message was far more powerful than any weapon dropped. It told Pakistan, we're no longer playing the same game. It told Pakistan, and that's terrifying for a state whose entire identity hinges on provoking India for attention, sympathy, or leverage. Suddenly, India refused to dance, and instead, it created its own rhythm. Through surgical precision, drone technology, satellite surveillance, and AI-enhanced intelligence operations. This is where most people miss the brilliance. India didn't become aggressive, it became intelligent. It started investing in silent capabilities, cybersecurity warfare units, anti-terror black ops, and pinpoint satellite-guided retaliatory teams. Every time a terror attack is linked to Pakistani soil, New Delhi's response is no longer predictable. Sometimes it's diplomatic freeze, sometimes it's economic embargo, and sometimes it's surgical, measured, targeted, leaving Pakistan confused and scrambling for answers. There's power in that unpredictability. It keeps the enemy anxious while preserving India's moral and strategic high ground. What's more, these actions are not just about physical retaliation. They are psychological recalibrations. When India responds without warning, without fanfare, it seizes control of the emotional narrative. Pakistan becomes the actor reacting to India's cue, not the other way around. This reversal of emotional momentum is a form of warfare that most traditional analysts overlook. It's like a chess player who no longer plays for the next move, but 5 moves ahead. And Pakistan is still playing checkers. And America? The truth is, this strategic shift unnerves it. Because for decades, the United States positioned itself as the sole referee in South Asian conflicts. It enjoyed playing both sides, lecturing India on restraint, throwing occasional aid at Pakistan, and pretending to balance the scales. But when India began acting on its own terms, without asking for Washington's permission or validation, America realized it had lost narrative control. India was no longer submitting reports, it was submitting results. Now, Pakistan finds itself in a uniquely humiliating position. It can no longer provoke India without consequence. The world doesn't rush to defend it. There's fatigue in Western diplomacy. Sympathy is dried up. And worse, India isn't giving it the one thing it always craved, reaction. Because in this new model, reaction is a reward. And India is done rewarding instability. This kind of discipline, this internal shift, isn't just military. It's cultural. It's philosophical. It's the mindset of a nation that has outgrown its old insecurities. India is no longer reacting from a place of pain or revenge, but from clarity, maturity, and strategic purpose. That's what makes the slap so powerful. It's not emotional. It's logical. It's not desperate. It's deliberate. And that's what terrifies not just Pakistan, but anyone who's been used to seeing India as a soft-spoken bystander in the global theater. So here's the lesson. You don't need to shout to dominate. You don't need to boast to lead. Sometimes the most effective move is the one made in silence, so precise that it cannot be debated, so clean that it cannot be denied. And when that slap lands, not on the skin, but on the psyche, it creates a scar that no speech can erase. That's real power. The kind that doesn't just win battles, but rewrites the rules of the entire game. It's easy to dismiss power as hardware, missiles, tanks, soldiers on borders. But real power, it's software. It's perception. It's who the world listens to when a crisis erupts. It's whose version of the story is believed, amplified, and defended. And this is where Pakistan has lost the war, not on the battlefield, but in the realm of global narrative. This is viewed as indisputable, but this is where Pakistan has lost the war, not on the battlefield, but in the realm of global narrative. And India quietly but brilliantly has seized control of that space. Let's be honest, there was a time, not long ago, when the global conversation treated India and Pakistan as equals, two noisy neighbors locked in an endless dispute. Western media outlets, politicians, and so-called human rights watchdogs would speak of the Kashmir issue as if it were some kind of mutual misunderstanding, as if Pakistan's involvement in terrorism was up for debate. That era is over. India has not just won the diplomatic war, it has reframed the entire narrative. And it didn't do it through shouting or emotional outbursts. It did it by aligning its growth with the aspirations of the world. While Pakistan remained locked in the past, obsessed with historical grievances and religious rhetoric, India moved forward. It became an economic force, a technology hub, a reliable partner for the world's biggest players. That's when the world stopped listening to Pakistan's complaints and started listening to India's vision. When countries like the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Israel extend hands of friendship toward India while distancing themselves from Pakistan, that's not coincidence. That's the result of a shift in global perception. And that perception was engineered through consistency, not just in policy, but in behavior. India didn't have to announce itself as a leader, it acted like one, and the world noticed. There's a psychological component to this that most people miss. The global stage is like a subconscious mind. It responds to certainty, direction, and optimism. Pakistan's story to the world is always about what it's against: India, Israel, the West, etc. India's story, on the other hand, is increasingly about what it's for: innovation, democracy, economic reform, and global cooperation. In the psychology of storytelling, the side that builds has more credibility than the side that blames. And Pakistan is stuck in blame mode. Even in the wake of major geopolitical events, like the abrogation of Article 370 in Kashmir, India held its ground. It didn't panic. It didn't flinch. While Pakistan screamed about international outrage, that outrage never really came. Sure, a few headlines, a few carefully worded statements, but no real consequences for India. Why? Because the world no longer sees Pakistan as a neutral victim. It sees it as a destabilizing force. And that perception is now deeply embedded in diplomatic circles, financial institutions, and media rooms. Meanwhile, India is being invited to the world's most exclusive tables: the G20, BRICS, Quad, and even strategic conversations with NATO. Pakistan is not just absent, it's not even considered. That silence is deafening. That's not exclusion by accident. That's the world choosing whom to listen to. And that choice isn't based on sentiment, it's based on trust. Let's talk about America. For years, it played both sides, arming Pakistan while doing trade with India. But look at the shift now. Defense partnerships, semiconductor investments, space tech collaborations. None of this is happening with Islamabad. In a test similar to this moment, we will shine as the world's greatest power, and America will shine as the world's greatest tech. None of this is happening with Islamabad. Washington is placing long-term bets on New Delhi, even if that makes some officials uncomfortable. Because here's the raw truth. No one wants to invest in chaos. And Pakistan, in the eyes of the world, no longer symbolizes potential, it symbolizes risk. And risk repels capital. It repels credibility. It repels trust. That's why even the Muslim world, historically sympathetic to Pakistan, is turning the other way. Today, Saudi Arabia is investing billions into Indian infrastructure. The UAE is signing digital agreements with Indian startups. Even Iran prefers strategic discussions with India when it comes to Chabahar and trade corridors. This isn't just a diplomatic win, it's a moral and philosophical one. India is no longer reacting to Pakistan's provocations. It's writing its own story. And the world is subscribing. That's what real narrative power looks like. In today's world, reputation is currency. Narrative is influence. When the world views you as a builder, a problem solver, a future-ready nation, your voice echoes louder than any weapon. And when it views you as a perpetual complainer, a provocateur, or worse, a sponsor of instability, your voice gets tuned out, no matter how loudly you shout. So what does this mean for you, for all of us watching this unfold? It means that the real war isn't always the one on the battlefield. It's the war for perception, for identity, for control over the global conversation. And India is winning that war not by dominating others, but by defining itself. In the end, the most powerful weapon is not what you hold in your hand, but the story the world tells about who you are. And right now, India is no longer just a rising power. It's the author of its own narrative. And right now, India is no longer just a rising power. It's the author of its own narrative. That is the loudest slap of all. When people think of retaliation, they often picture missiles, tanks, or boots on the ground. But the sharpest blow India has delivered to Pakistan wasn't fired from a gun. It was wired through the global economy. It was a financial slap. One so silent, so precise, that most of the world missed it. Yet its impact has been devastating. While Pakistan obsessed over borders and battles, India moved the war to a battlefield Pakistan wasn't prepared for. Economic. You see, in the modern world, power doesn't come only from military strength. It comes from economic leverage. Who controls the trade routes? Who influences the lending institutions? Who dictates the terms of engagement? And India, without making much noise, has quietly dominated this space. While Pakistan clung to outdated models of foreign aid and defense dependency, India positioned itself as an indispensable economic partner for the 21st century. The most important shift happened not on a battlefield, but in trade policy. After repeated terror attacks, India revoked Pakistan's most favored nation MFN status. This wasn't just a symbolic move, it was psychological. Because for decades, Pakistan relied on trade loopholes with India to support segments of its struggling economy. With a stroke of policy, India cut off that oxygen. It didn't scream, it didn't threaten, it just closed the valve and waited. That is strategic patience. That is power. And that's only the beginning. India didn't stop with bilateral trade. It went a step further, into the global financial architecture. At the International Monetary Fund, IMF, at the Financial Action Task Force, FATF, at the United Nations, India began influencing conversations quietly and effectively. It used data, evidence, and reputation to ensure that Pakistan was viewed for what it was, a high-risk economy entangled with terrorism financing and institutional corruption. Every time Pakistan went begging to the IMF for a bailout, India made sure the world remembered the real problem. Not lack of money, but lack of trust. Not a fiscal crisis, but a credibility crisis. And that credibility crisis became Pakistan's shadow, following it into every negotiation, every investment meeting, every loan request. Now think about the psychological impact of that. Pakistan, a country once used to leverage its strategic location as a bargaining chip, suddenly found itself isolated. No one wanted to invest. No one wanted to lend. No one wanted to partner long term. Because India had flipped the script. It wasn't just about punishing Pakistan. It was about positioning India as the more trustworthy, stable, and future-ready partner. And India did that not by blocking others, but by building itself. It invested in infrastructure. It became the world's back office, the lab of innovation, the engine of digital finance. UPI, Aadhaar, ONDC, these weren't just tech platforms. They were trust platforms. And when you work in Pakistan, you understand that even in big cities, you find tech in so many parts of your life. The places that you wouldn't position a drug or a drug editor, these weren't just tech platforms. They sent a message to the world. India can scale. India can deliver. India is where the future is being built. So when companies, banks, and countries looked at South Asia, the choice became obvious. India was the opportunity. Pakistan was the liability. And in international economics, perception is everything. If people believe you are risky, even your best numbers won't save you. And if they believe in your story, even your weaknesses become forgivable. That's what India mastered. Economic storytelling backed by real progress. Now here's the part that most people overlook. This entire economic offensive wasn't loud. It didn't make front page news. But that's what made it so effective. Because while Pakistan was trying to provoke a reaction through drama, India was removing one piece of leverage at a time, until Pakistan stood exposed, economically naked, in front of the very powers it once tried to manipulate. That's where the story becomes even more interesting. Because America, once a traditional ally of Pakistan, began shifting its investments toward India. Not just because of democracy or defense, but because of dollars. Capital follows confidence. And India gave Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and Washington a long-term story they could believe in. Pakistan didn't. That shift wasn't just financial, it was psychological. It told Pakistan you're no longer necessary, and told India you're now central. That's the ultimate slap. Not one that hurts the body, but one that destroys illusion. One that forces your opponent to look in the mirror and see what the world now sees. A nation in decline, not because of external enemies, but because of internal rot. And that is where India's strategy becomes philosophical. It didn't beat Pakistan by being more aggressive. It became more right. It became more intelligent. It brought more progress. It beat Pakistan by being more credible. It didn't scream louder. It simply built better. That's a deeper form of power. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself every day because the results are already speaking. So remember this. In the new age of global conflict, the strongest strike is not the one that breaks bones. It's the one that breaks narratives. And India has just delivered that strike. Quietly, decisively, irreversibly. Sometimes history doesn't change with a war. Sometimes it changes with a decision. Quiet, calculated, and irreversible. When India revoked Article 370 and fully integrated Jammu and Kashmir into its constitutional framework, it wasn't just rewriting a law. It was redrawing the psychological map of South Asia. And more importantly, it was announcing to the world that the age of ambiguity was over. India was no longer going to tiptoe around the sensitivities of Pakistan or the expectations of America. This move was not random, it was strategic, layered with decades of political maturity, national frustration, and geopolitical patience. For years, Pakistan had treated Kashmir as its pressure point, a tool for provoking, distracting, and internationalizing a domestic problem. But India's bold move took that tool away. In one stroke, India turned Pakistan's permanent grievance into permanent irrelevance. What makes this even more fascinating is how India did it. Not through military conquest or violence, but through parliamentary legislation, constitutional clarity, and administrative precision. It wasn't a coup. It wasn't a war. It was governance. And that is what stunned the world. Not because they didn't see it coming, but because they never expected India to move so decisively without flinching. Yeah, Pakistan screamed. Of course it did. It called for international intervention, summoned ambassadors, and organized protest marches. But the world, this time, didn't echo its outrage. No global sanctions, no UN resolutions, no military coalitions rushing to its defense. And that silence was deafening. That silence for Pakistan was the real betrayal. But the deeper story here is how America reacted or didn't. For decades, the US positioned itself as the great mediator of the subcontinent. It liked having both India and Pakistan on a string, using Kashmir as leverage. But suddenly, India took the chessboard and flipped it. It didn't ask Washington. It didn't seek approval from the State Department. It made its move and simply informed the world, this is our internal matter. You are free to watch, but not interfere. That's when America realized something uncomfortable. India wasn't the junior partner anymore. It wasn't waiting for a green light. It was acting from a position of sovereign confidence. And this made American policymakers uneasy, because what they saw was not just a strategic shift, but a psychological transformation. India was not aligning, it was asserting. And that's the difference. Alignment implies dependence. Assertion implies independence. India chose the latter. It made clear that its actions would be shaped by its own interests, not by the preferences of Washington, London, or Brussels. That message, more than the actual abrogation of Article 370, was the loudest declaration of strategic autonomy in modern Indian history. Meanwhile, on the ground, something remarkable happened. Despite fears of unrest, despite months of intense scrutiny, the region didn't explode the way the critics predicted. There were security measures, yes. There was resistance, as expected. But it wasn't the collapse of order that many forecasted. Slowly but surely, the narrative began to shift. New roads, investments, startups, educational reforms. They began emerging where there was once only despair and dependency. This wasn't just territorial control, it was developmental transformation. Pakistan, of course, continued its rhetorical warfare, but each statement felt more hollow, each protest more isolated. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation barely mentioned Kashmir in its major summits. Countries that once offered strong words were now signing deals with India. Even China, despite its own tensions with India, stayed relatively quiet about Pakistan's Kashmir obsession. Why? Because the world had recalibrated its understanding. It realized that India wasn't acting out of aggression, it was acting out of closure, out of a need to end a decades-long chapter of ambiguity and claim what it believed was already its own. That's something every sovereign nation understands, even if they won't admit it publicly. And here's where the psychological depth comes in. For a country like Pakistan, whose identity is entangled with the Kashmir issue, India's move wasn't just territorial, it was existential. It removed the one thing Pakistan used to rally domestic emotions and justify global relevance. Now, with Article 370 gone, the narrative is over. And without that narrative, Pakistan is just another struggling nation with a weak economy and a confused foreign policy. India, on the other hand, used this moment to display maturity. It didn't just assert control, it invited development. It didn't just claim land, it aimed to uplift lives. That dual message of strength and compassion is what makes this move a masterstroke. Because it wasn't just about winning a territory. It was about ending a lie and starting a new chapter with clarity and courage. So if you're still thinking that bold moves require global approval, think again. Sometimes the most powerful step is taken alone. And when that step is backed by vision, discipline, and moral confidence, it not only reshapes borders, it reshapes the future. Because in a world full of noise, the one who acts with quiet conviction always leads the next era. Power today doesn't just reside in missiles or manpower. It resides in data, in algorithms, in connectivity. The battlefield has shifted from the ground to the cloud. And while much of the world was still obsessed with traditional power equations, India quietly leaped into a realm that not only outpaced Pakistan, but began to make even America uncomfortable. This isn't about who has the bigger army. It's about who has the smarter code. India's technological rise didn't begin with a bang. It began with building blocks, UPI, Aadhaar, digital infrastructure, and now AI and semiconductor investments. Piece by piece, India crafted a digital ecosystem not just to serve its billion-plus citizens, but to redefine how modern nations operate. And here lies the contrast. While Pakistan spent its resources on defense budgets and short-term loans, India spent its capital on software, startups, and scalable innovation. Just think about it. UPI alone has revolutionized how money moves in India. A rickshaw driver in a remote village and a CEO in a Mumbai high-riser can use the same system. Instant, secure, and without middlemen. No country in the West, not even America, has achieved this level of financial inclusivity. That isn't just progress, that's a model, and the world is watching. Now look at what's happening with AI and quantum computing. India isn't just consuming technology anymore, it's creating it. It's setting standards, building chips, training engineers, and fostering unicorns at a pace few expected. And while America once welcomed this talent with open arms, now there's hesitation. Because India's rise no longer looks like dependence, it looks like independence. That makes America nervous, because it's used to leading the innovation narrative, and now it's being challenged. The frustration comes from the fact that India isn't copying, it's inventing. And it's doing it with fewer resources, less legacy baggage, and more resilience. It's turning scarcity into creativity, bureaucracy into opportunity, and complexity into scalable simplicity. That is the mindset of transformation. It's not about chasing Silicon Valley. It's about building Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Pune into new global tech capitals. And Pakistan? Let's be direct, it's not even in the race. Its digital infrastructure is underdeveloped, its educational pipeline underfunded, and its institutions politically fragile. It's still stuck in an era where the government defines innovation instead of empowering it. There is no tech ecosystem, no unicorn surge, no global interest. While India is exporting cloud engineers and AI models, Pakistan is exporting labor and remittances. The gap is not just technological, it's philosophical. Because here's the deeper truth. Technology isn't just tools and apps. It's a mindset. It's a way of seeing problems and solving them without waiting for someone else's permission. India has embraced that mindset. It has allowed entrepreneurs to fail, iterate, and try again. It has opened markets, deregulated policies, and built platforms that scale trust. And that trust between citizens, businesses, and government is the true currency of a digital society. Even China, for all its scale, lacks that kind of trust-based model, and the West, with all its capital, lacks the urgency and agility. That leaves India in a unique position, a democratic powerhouse with digital speed. And that terrifies the old powers, not because India is threatening them, but because it doesn't need them anymore. America's discomfort isn't just economic, it's emotional. It's realizing that India no longer depends on its funding, its approval, or its platforms. Indian developers are creating local alternatives to global monopolies. Indian companies are leading AI research, blockchain innovation, and even space technology. And that's the kind of independence the West isn't used to from its so-called allies. But here's the philosophical core of it. India is not rising out of anger or revenge. It's rising out of self-belief. It's not interested in defeating others, it's interested in discovering itself. And that journey, powered by technology, is not just national, it's civilizational. It's the revival of an ancient mind with modern tools. A country that once taught the world math, astronomy, and philosophy is now returning to its roots through code, data, and design. So when you see India building faster networks, launching new satellites, or educating millions through digital classrooms, understand that this is not just development. It is strategy, it is resilience, it is soft power that cannot be sanctioned, invaded, or silenced. And the world is waking up to it. Silicon Valley investors, European policymakers, even African nations. Everyone wants a piece of India's tech playbook because it's no longer just a country of engineers. It's becoming a country of engineers with influence. Pakistan can't replicate this overnight. America can't control it forever. Because this kind of rise isn't outsourced, it's earned. And that is the real message. In the 21st century, intelligence beats intimidation, agility beats arrogance, and the nation that controls the code will control the future. India has understood this, and it's already writing that future one line of code at a time. The most misunderstood kind of power is the power to say no. Not with rebellion, not with aggression, but with clarity. And that's where India has changed the game entirely. For decades, it was expected to follow, expected to comply, expected to ask for permission before acting in its own interest. But now, India is doing something that makes both Pakistan and America uneasy. It's thinking for itself. This is the part of India's evolution that gets under the skin of global powers. Because when a country as large, as complex, and as consequential as India stops taking cues from Washington or reacting to Islamabad's provocations, the usual rules stop working. This is not the India of the 98s, hesitant in its diplomacy and unsure of its identity. This is a different India, one that listens, observes, but acts only when the decision aligns with its own long-term vision. Let's take the example of Russia. The West expected India to toe the line on sanctions, to follow NATO's lead, to cut ties and criticize Moscow. But India refused, not because it supports conflict, but because it understands the principle of strategic autonomy. India maintained relations with Russia, continued buying oil, and even expanded trade, while making it clear that it would not compromise its sovereignty under pressure from anyone, no matter how powerful. That shook the West, because they realized they can no longer treat India as a junior partner. This is a country that weighs its own interests first, a country that has matured beyond dependency. And that, philosophically, is the essence of true independence, not just political, but psychological. You can see it in how India handles its defense partnerships. It works with the U.S. on technology transfer. It trains with the French Navy. It buys systems from Israel and Russia. But it refuses to be locked into any one alliance. India's strategy is open, diversified, and self-determined. It's not anti-West. It's not anti-East. It's simply pro-India. That approach might frustrate Washington, but it commands respect, because it reflects strength. And it's exactly this refusal to be someone else's pawn that leaves Pakistan fuming. For years, Pakistan tried to position itself as a counterbalance to India, a rival on the global stage. But the world doesn't buy that narrative anymore. Why? Because India has outgrown the game. It doesn't compete with Pakistan. It ignores it. It doesn't retaliate emotionally. It calculates. That's a bigger insult than any war. It's strategic dismissal. Pakistan's identity, for a long time, was built around being India's equal opposite. But now, that model has collapsed. India's focus is on self-reliance, global trade, space missions, digital infrastructure. Pakistan's focus is still on proving a point, clinging to Kashmir rhetoric, and seeking validation from a world that has moved on. And America? America is realizing that India's friendship must be earned, not assumed. This is no longer a client state. It's a civilizational force. India will collaborate but on its own terms. It will trade but not at the cost of its farmers. It will innovate but not at the mercy of foreign monopolies. And when it chooses to act, whether in defense, diplomacy, or development, it does so with full ownership of the consequences. That's what makes this new India impossible to control and therefore deeply respected, because the most powerful nations are not the ones with the biggest budgets, but the ones with the clearest boundaries. The ones that know who they are, what they stand for, and where they're going, without needing constant validation. This kind of autonomy requires more than courage. It requires vision, discipline, patience. India didn't reach this point overnight. It came through decades of learning, failures, recalibrations, through crises like 1991's economic collapse and 2008's global recession, through wars, through border standoffs, through internal political evolution. But out of all of that came a country no longer looking for a script to follow, but writing one of its own. And that script is clear. India will not be bullied by Pakistan, nor managed by America. It will engage, but it will not obey. It will lead, but it will not dictate. It will protect its interests, but not compromise its principles. This is a different India, and the world is learning how to deal with it. So if you're wondering what makes a country truly powerful, don't just look at its weapons or wealth. Look at its ability to say no, without fear, without apology, without noise. That is real power. Quiet, firm, and unshakable. And that's the lesson for every emerging nation, every young leader, every citizen watching this unfold. Don't just grow, grow without permission. Because the future doesn't belong to those who follow orders. It belongs to those who define their own direction and walk it boldly, no matter who's watching.